to adjust and adapt to long-run changes in climatic conditions. So why this question matters? Because many of the quantitative estimates of the impact of global climate change on the economic output you see in those governmental and non-profit organizations' reports depend crucially on how agents might adapt to climate change. So if agents appear to be slow or unable to adjust on their own, then overall damage from climate change could have a greater welfare implication than the other scenario when agents could swiftly adapt to the changing climate. And it also informs cost-benefit analysis that is central to climate mitigation policies. So apparently some economists think that climate change is not going to be a big deal in the long run future because we can swiftly, as a human, we are able to adapt over the long run. So I just quote one very interesting article by John Cochrane from Wall Street Journal in 2017. He says that the spread over a century, the cost of moving and adapting are not as imposing as they seem. Even the cost of moving cities would be bearable. Migration is costly, but much of the world population moved from farm to city in the 20th century. Allowing people to move to better climate in the 21st century will be equally possible. So economists assume that rational agents will surely adapt to a changing climate over the long run. But the empirical question is that do we actually observe adaptation activity happening given the recent rise in global temperature? And this is a question that we're going to address in this paper. So more formally, climate change, as you probably know, there are two ways to reduce the impact of climate change. One is called the climate mitigation. So this is the development of new technology or carbon capture technologies that can reduce the carbon emission. While adaptation refers to that once the harm is done, once you already face the rising temperature, how can human and economic system adapt to the changing climate and to reduce the negative impact? So those are the two different ways that can help address climate change. So in this paper, we particularly focus on adaptation. So this paper in particular, we examine adaptation made by firms in response to long-term change in climatic conditions. The reason because in most modern economy, firms are the key driver of wealth creation. And we also have a very large sample can provide a large cross-section to examine what factors may shape or hamper firms' adaptation to climate change. And more specifically, we examine one particular important climatic variable, which is the temperature. And we examine whether exposure to prolonged high temperature can affect the firm's decision in employment and also the decision to closing the establishment. So we measure climate change as two measures. So one is called the average of normal temperature. This is a moving average of temperature, and we also take the deviation of this moving average from the historical long-run average. So this is to capture the abnormal rising of temperature due to global warming. And another measure we use is the number of hot days experienced at each location. So the reason is that this measure can give us that the maximum amount of the heat or temperature that people may experience during the horizon. And because we know that what makes people feel bad is not about average temperature, but about the maximum amount of temperature that ever achieved in a given year or given season. So this is another measure that we look at. And we use establishment level data to show that how firms may change their employment and also change the entire decision to establish or close a plant in a particular region using establishment level data from the National Establishment Time Series database. So this database provides very accurate information about the geographic location of a firm's establishment, and also information such as sales generated by this establishment, and also the number of employees employed by this establishment. So our main result is that we find that firms indeed adapt to climate change or rising temperature, but only if the rising temperature is persists for a long time. So we found that prolonged high temperature in a county lead to a significant decline in established outcome, such as employment and also even the closure of establishment. And economically, we find that a 1 Celsius degree increase in a 5-year moving average of normal temperature lead to a 5% standard deviation decline in employment, and also a similar amount of decrease in number of establishments. And interestingly, there's a paper by Gerard, Adam, and Ortiz, Bobbia. They found that when we measure temperature shock over a short horizon, such as 1 year, you would not observe any effect on the US establishment outcome. And we also replicate the result and find a similar insignificant effect. So this effect that we document only pick up when we measure temperature change over a very long, relatively long horizon, such as a 5-year horizon. So this suggests that only when, this is kind of intuitive, because only when temperature is prolonged and persists over several years, then managers start to pay more attention and start to take adaptive actions. And we then conjecture 2 potential channels underlying firms' decision to cut employment and closing establishment when facing prolonged high temperature. And this is motivated by the evidence I show you in the beginning. So first, there are several studies show that the per capita income in US and also the state level GDP growth reduce as a result of the high temperature. So this deteriorating economic fundamental could lead to firms' decision to lay off workers because they face a lower demand from the consumers for their products and goods. And the second channel is that the study shows that extreme temperature can negatively affect the productivity and the supply of workers. So this, if the productivity of the supply of workers reduced, then from the profit maximization point of view, you should reduce the quantity of labor inputs. So this is the second potential channel. So our evidence suggests that the results is most consistent with the local demand, consumer demand channel. Following several evidence. First, we find that abnormal high temperature affect establishment level sales, but not labor productivity. And we then find that the adaptation that we documented is most pronounced for firms located in the non-tradable and the consumer-oriented sectors. And we also look at the differential response across heat-sensitive and non-heat sensitive industries. And we find that there is no significant difference between the 2 types of sectors. So this is not consistent with the labor productivity channel, which predicts that the effect should be stronger or concentrated in the heat-sensitive industries. And then later on, we also examine whether firms actively reallocate labor across establishment. And we do not find evidence for within firm labor reallocation. And we also did some cross-sectional heterogeneity test to inform what kind of factors may accelerate or dampen firms' adaptation activity. So in particular, we focus on the manager's belief and concern about climate change. Because remember that our independent variable is a temperature shock variable. So some firm manager may be skeptical about climate change, so they do not take it very seriously. So we should not expect those firms to take costly adaptive actions. So only when the firm managers truly believe in global warming and climate change, they will interpret the rising temperature as a manifestation of the global climate change. And then it warrants the costly and potentially irreversible adaptive actions. So this is precisely what we found using several measures of managers' belief and concern about climate change. So because for the time constraints, I will skip the literature review part. So we use a county level monthly temperature data from the NOAA and also the daily temperature data from the PRISM climate group. And as I said, we construct 2 variables. One is the abnormal mean temperature, defined as a 5-year average temperature and the long-run historical average temperature for each county. So this is called the abnormal temperature. The second measure is called the number of hot days. So we count the number of hot days when daily mean temperature exceeds 25 degrees for each county. So 25 degrees is a threshold that used to define hot weather, but the results go through if we define it using a more extreme threshold, such as 30 Celsius degree. And the establishment level data is from the NAS public listed database produced by Wall and Associates, and provide address as well as information on sales and employment for millions of US establishments owned by public firms over the period from 1990 to 2012. And we match establishment level data to the parent company in counties data by company name. And after matching the established location with the temperature data, which is also at the county level, we have a roughly 3.7 million establishment year level observation. And we also control for county level economic variables from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we use two proxies to capture managers' belief and concern about climate change. So first, a belief is a survey-based measure of the local climate change belief in the firm's headquarter county from the Yale Climate Opinion Map. So this provides estimates of the proportion of American adults in each county believing climate change and global warming. And the second measure is at firm level. So this measure is called concern. This is a dummy variable equals 1 if climate change or global warming appears in the firm's 8K or 10K filing in a particular year. So our empirical methodology utilizes high dimensional fixed effect because we have a plant level observation. So we follow this climate economy literature and rely on exogenous weather variation over time within a given spatial unit at identification. So our outcome variable Y is the number of employees or number of establishment for each firm I in county C scaled by the number of employees for the same firm in state S to which the county belongs at year T. And as we said, we have two measures of long-term climate change. And we also have a high dimensional fixed effect. So particularly, we control for firm by county fixed effect that can absorb any unobserved time invariant factors in the firm county pair. And we also control for firm year fixed effect that can control for time varying firm investment opportunity. So as a result, we are comparing essentially different establishments belonging to the same firm in the same year, but located in different counties. So they are exposed to different temperature shocks. And we control for a set of county level macroeconomic variables, which is to account for that the effect may be driven by macro level conditions at the county level. So this is a summary statistics. So as you can see, on average, the average abnormal temperature across all counties is positive, around 1.15 Fahrenheit degree. And the average number of hot days over 5-year period is 260 days. So this map shows you that in majority of the US over the past 2 decades, the temperature are rising. So this is consistent with the global warming. And in particular, we find that place in maybe East Coast and also part of the South and the West Coast have the highest increase in abnormal temperature. And then this map shows you the belief measures that we get from the Yale Climate Opinion Map. So this is the estimated percentage of adults who are worried about global warming in 2015. So as probably not very surprising, a larger fraction of the residents in the East Coast and the West Coast believe in or worried about global warming than people in the middle of the US. So we first replicated this Adams et al.'s paper that temperature shock over a short horizon, such as 1 year, do not impact establishment level sales or productivity. So we replicated the results and find a similar insignificant effects when abnormal temperature or the number of hot days is measured over a 1-year period. So this is consistent with their paper. However, we think that we should not simply stop here because the effect of the climate change will have a larger impact and more costly to mitigate if the hot temperature persists over a relatively long period. So firms may take more observed actions when they're facing long-term change in climatic conditions. So we conduct abnormal temperature average over the past 2 to 4 years and rerun the test. So you can see that when we average the temperature over a longer horizon, the effect gradually pick up, and there's almost a monotonic increasing effect of the temperature on the employee and the number of establishment when we increase the horizon to measure the abnormal temperature. So this is consistent with the intuitions that if a natural disaster or extreme weather persists for a very long time, then firm may pay more attention to it or get more serious about this issue and then start to take actions. So as a result, our baseline results, we were going to measure abnormal temperature and the number of hot days over past a 5-year period. And then we regress the plant level employees and the number of plants in the county level on the abnormal temperature average over the past 5 years. So you can see that first, there is a negative effect of the temperature on the number of employees or the number of plants at this affected county. And also, when we decompose the abnormal temperature into different quintiles, so you can see that the effect is also nonlinear, and it's also, the result is the most pronounced when the county experiences the highest level of abnormal high temperature. And we find similar results if we use the number of hot days over the past 5 years as a measure of climate change. You see that the effect only pick up when the county experiences a higher, extremely high frequency of hot days. So then we test what are the potential channels that motivate a firm to adapt by laying off employee and closing establishment. So as I said, there are 2 potential channels motivated by the literature. So the local consumer demand channel in particular predicts that is based on evidence that high temperature reduce per capita income, and also the declining house income and the deteriorating economic fundamental could reduce consumer demand for the local products and the service. And there is even a model showing that the effect of weather on the productivity of the time spent on non-market activity, such as shopping and recreation. So if consumers shift their purchasing decision or consumption decision in response to extreme weather, that can also show up in our effects. And another channel is that prior studies show that the high temperature can negatively affect labor supply and productivity, especially for industries that are highly exposed to heat and temperature. And then we test these 2 channels. First, we examine whether normal temperature affect establishment level sales and the productivity. So the productivity measure here is not the typical total factor productivity because we do not observe the capital expenditure. So our measure of productivity is simply the log of sales over the number of employees at the plant level. So you can see that the evidence is most consistent with the local consumer demand channel because we find that the establishment level sales also respond negatively to the high temperature, but we do not observe any significant effect of the productivity on temperature. So this is the evidence showing you that the evidence seems to consistent with the consumer demand channel rather than the productivity channel. And then we also conjecture, following the study by me and Sufi, the econometrica paper, arguing that the local demand channel should predict a differential response of non-tradable versus tradable sector across counties, because the firm in the non-tradable sector heavily rely on local demand. So if the channel is really the local demand channel, then this is a place where we should find the largest impact. While the tradable sector, their demand rely on national or even global demand. So we should not observe much effect. Even if the local income reduce, the tradable sector, the sales and the employee should not be much affected because their demand come from the entire nation or even the global level. So we classify industry into tradable and non-tradable sector following the definition in me and Sufi, and we run a test, and we need to find the effect concentrated in the non-tradable sectors. And then we also conduct industry level analysis to examine which industry react most strongly to climate change. So our results, as you can see, that the point estimate on the abnormal temperature are negative for 7 out of 11 industry, but the results is most significant both economically and statistically for the industry, the consumer discretionary industry, and also some effect in the consumer staples. So this is again consistent with the local demand channel. And we also test whether there is some evidence in the labor productivity channel by examining the differential response between heat sensitive and non-heat sensitive industry. So again, this is motivated by the previous evidence I showed you in the beginning. So we add the interaction between heat sensitive dummy and the abnormal temperature, and we find that the coefficient is mostly insignificant. So again, we do not find the support for the heat sensitive industry. And I then have some results on, we have some results on cross-sectional test. For example, we show that the managers' belief and concern about climate change play a role in the adaptive action. The reason is because the laying off workers or closing establishment are potentially costly and irreversible corporate decision. So you should not simply respond to a temporal temperature shock by closing the establishment or laying off workers. Only if you believe that this rising temperature is a manifestation of a bigger narrative, which is global warming, that could persist into the distant future and could result in a permanent change in the climatic condition, then you would take such costly actions. So in this case, then whether the manager believes in climate change or not plays an important role. And luckily for us in the US, this is a country with a larger dispersed group of agents. Some of them heavily believe in climate change, while others are very skeptical. So we have a larger cross-section, which is probably not available to do in other countries like in Europe. So we hypothesize that the adaptation should be more pronounced for firms whose decision makers strongly believe in and are concerned about climate change. So we interact the belief and concern measure with climate change with abnormal temperature measure, and indeed find the effect is stronger when the manager more firmly believe in or concerned about climate change. And then we also look at whether firm reallocated employees or open new establishment in unaffected counties. So we follow the Giroud and Muller's methodology. The idea is to define another temperature exposure variable, which is a sales weighted abnormal temperature of other counties where the firm also has plants. So the idea is that if other locations experience high temperature, then firms were more likely to move their employees or open new plants in this unaffected county. So what you should predict is that the abnormal temperature as a measure should have a positive significant coefficient. Well, we find an insignificant negative coefficient. So this suggests there is no reallocation across establishment within the same firm. So let me quickly conclude. In this paper, we use detailed establishment level data to provide systematic evidence on firm adaptation to climate change. So the evidence shows that firms do respond to prolonged high temperature by cutting employment and even closing its entire establishment. But that also depends on whether the manager truly believe in climate change and other organizational structures that may impede or amplify firms' adaptation tendency. So with that, I think this is the end of my presentation.